record the meeting.
Thanks.
Started.
Okay, so it's good evening here from Nottingham in England, United Kingdom. Thank you all for attending. I think we're going to have a very interesting event tonight. We have some fantastic lightning talks coming from different perspectives, coming from different regions in the world. And then we're also going to have a Chatham House, so a confidential breakout session where you will be allocated into different breakout rooms. So the plan is that for the next 30 to 40 minutes, we'll be kicking off with these lightning talks. Then we will be having a 10-minute comfort break. And at 8:50, yes, then we will be going into the breakout rooms. So please feel free to use the chat. And just a reminder that when we're in the breakout rooms and under Chatham House rules, we won't be recording those sessions at all. So first of all, I'd like to kick off with Steve and Shawn. The floor is yours.
So, Steve, would you like me to start and set the scene then?
Absolutely. Yep.
So my name is Shawn Ross. I'm at Macquarie University, and I am the Director of Data Science and E-Research there. I think it's okay, and it was no secret. So recently, we've gone through the process of procuring an institutional research data repository. We haven't had one in the past. Until I was appointed to this position 3 years ago, no one was looking after e-research. So we're kind of catching up at Macquarie. So one of our priorities is we've moved from a stock-taking benchmarking phase with e-research that's taken up most of the last 3 years. One of the first things we wanted to do was to stand up an institutional research data repository. And due to various institutional constraints that I can talk more about during the discussion if anybody's interested, we decided that what we needed at Macquarie was a solution that we weren't hosting, something that was delivered software as a service. And I don't think it's any secret to anybody, so I'm happy to share that I was advocating very strongly for an open source based solution, and one that would be more of a partnership than just a client relationship with the vendor. And so in the end, through our procurement process, we came down to Figshare or Dataverse, hosted by the Australian Data Archive, which Steve will talk about in a minute. And so that's a little bit of the background. And what ended up, from our perspective, or from my perspective, I guess the way I would interpret it, things didn't go the way that I had hoped. And it was, I think, largely because the way that this worked was that for 2 years, we were start and stop. This is going to happen. Maybe it's going to happen. Maybe the CIO will back it. Maybe they won't. There were delays. There were delays to hiring the additional staff that we needed to even, go through the procurement process. My team was very small. I was only half time, and so there were a lot of delays. And then when things happened, they had to happen now because our CapEx was going to expire, and it had to happen immediately. I think that presented some challenges to any sort of I would say non-standard commercial vendor delivery, and so that's where, despite some advocacy that I've been doing, we ended up going with Figshare. And I'll turn it over to Steve now to get what his perspective of it was. That was sort of what it looked like from my side, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, Shawn sort of set the context for talking about, in a sense, what a fairly standard, I think, university procurement process is like, from the point of view of just procuring a new piece of software or a new piece of infrastructure. I think the interesting from the other side of the equation, so obviously there was Figshare and ourselves who were interested in bidding on the process. I think the question was, from our point of view, was looking at how do you evolve a relationship in such a way? It's how do you manage a engagement with a partner under the sorts of procurement rules that exist in the university, in many sectors. I'll put the context that ADA, we provide a national service here in Australia, similar to a lot of the social science data archives across Europe. So we supporting a national model, and this was a new sort of a new area for us in terms of a means of service delivery. So we were and that was the reason for the long discussions with Shawn as well, was partly thinking a little bit about what such a model might look like. So this was going to be the first opportunity for us to test out how that might work. And I think that that was interesting both from the point from Macquarie's point of view and from ADA's point of view as well. So how do you how do we position ourselves to respond to those sorts of procurement processes was going to be one part of the issue that was there. The second question was, is a procurement process in a sense the right sort of model here for delivering that style of service? And here I sort of discuss the fact that a lot of the work that we've done is often partnerships, grant proposals, often collaborative arrangements. A straight competitive tender process is probably not conducive to that style of operation. And so we had to think in some detail about how we would go about that. And there were probably a number of parameters in there that it's the sort of thing that you would often put into a final version of an agreement, but might evolve over a period of time. Whereas in a procurement process, in a sense, you're kind of setting those out in a very defined way in advance, or probably a much more structured way than you might otherwise have done in some other form of arrangement. The form of discussion. I think the third pressure that was problematic was, in a sense, the timeframes. And again, I think we may have been a victim of circumstance here. This year being what it is, and the Australian university sector in particular. For those who aren't aware, there's been a grand total of $0 spent in Australia on support for universities this year in response to COVID. So we are, across the university sector facing a situation where money is, simply, the financial discussions are, how do we not lose any more money? Fundamentally, and that's across the sector. That's not specific to Macquarie or ANU for that matter. So under a set of circumstances where you're dealing with particular, short-term, a short-term period where finances are available, how do you turn around those discussions quickly and set things in place? So that the types of timeframes that we would generally work under, and often work in the academic sector, months, and generally years. Here we were talking weeks. Fundamentally was kind of the challenges. How do you respond to in a very short time frame, the sorts of tendering processes that might exist? I don't think that's so problematic, but particularly, when does the money have to be spent? And what are the sorts of time frames through which, when does the money have to get out the door? How long have you got to spend it? Which then impacts on delivery dates and the like. And the challenges of those, and what you can, it says, what can you have sitting on the shelf as opposed to what do you evolve throughout the period of the relationship, really made that, that was probably going to be the core of the challenge from our point of view, is it's very difficult to evolve a set of requirements, establish those requirements, and implement over time those different things when you're looking at a deadline that is, as I say, in the very short term, fundamentally, just as a function of some of the financial situations that are underway. So
1 minute.
I mean, these were. Yep. So these were the things that were kind of pressing upon us, and fundamentally, that's really what led us. We went through the tendering process. We did in the end. We didn't actually submit a final proposal, and it was these were the sorts of considerations as to why we had to think about the fact that fundamentally, from as the director of the centre of the archive, my decision was I don't think we can deliver the sort of service in the sort of timeframes for that's really going to address the need that that Macquarie has under the constraints that exist there. And I think given a different set of constraints and a different set of fundamentally those different set of not financial but contractual and delivery arrangements, that would have been an entirely different discussion. And I think that's really part of the pressure and some of those pain points we're here to talk about today. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, both of you. Really interesting. So we're going to have a time for some questions, but if you have other questions, please put them in the chat for Shawn and Steve. And now we will be going next to Rory and Bruce.
Are you okay to screen share, Rory, with your slides? Yeah. Oh, we can't hear you.
You may be muted.
Yeah, Rory, I think you're muted. We can't hear you. Let me put it in the chat as well. Hopefully he can hear us.
Yeah, there's another curious icon next to his name there as well. I've not seen.
Let me look.
It's not coming up for me that he's actually muted, so...
No, it's not either for me.
He's just toggled the mute back and forth.
Yeah.
So Rory says he can hear us.
And he's not muted, but we're not hearing you. Do you want to move to the next talk and we can try and, I don't know if you can maybe sign out and back in, Rory, or try and configure the audio, just check what it's picking up. I know mine sometimes picks up the Mac rather than the headphones. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Rory. Okay, so next up we have Kevin Ashley talking about DMP Online.
Thanks very much. I'll just wait a moment for this. So hopefully, yeah, you can see my slides and you can hear me. So I'm going to talk about DMP Online. I'll explain a bit what it is and our experiences responding to procurement. And I'd just like to acknowledge I've taken a number of the images in here and the content from my colleague Magdalena Drafiova, who's the DMP Online Customer Development Manager. So some context, both for those of you aware what it is and for those of you who aren't. DMP Online is a web-based service that helps researchers and those they work with to create and maintain data management plans. It was launched in 2010 by the DCC, and the DCC then was a national body funded.
It's hit mute on you, Kevin.
Yeah, somebody muted me. A national body funded by JISC, which you may be aware has gone through a radical rebranding exercise and is now JISC, with a slight change to the case of its name. Initially, it was just for researchers to use, and it was firmly aimed at the UK. But we saw international potential in it, I think, from the outset, and at the launch we had US funder requirements in the system. It was free to use, and I think it's fair to say that the international interest then exceeded our expectations. So in the first 5 years, well, there were lots of revisions. It's a service, you throw away code, you redesign. We added services and we added interfaces for organizational administrators. We made the code open source as part of a general program of making all the DCC's products openly licensed. And we thought hard about how could we attract international funding to support an international service. And our initial assumption was that we were going to do that primarily by approaching national bodies. After all, we were funded by a national body. We were wrong about that. We could also see that that national funding we were getting from JISC was under threat. So we pursued other grants to support some feature development in DMP Online, and we got our host university to invest some of its own money. After 5 years, at the end of 2015, we had our first paying overseas customers. And although that didn't involve procurement process, you still need a lot of the baggage that goes with it. It meant we needed contracts, we needed service agreements, and we needed lots of legal administrative support to draw those up, to work out how to get payments from Australia, from Finland, from other countries. And by then also, we knew that those worries, those predictions we made about losing our national funding were right. And we were going to need to shift this fairly rapidly. So fast forward over the next 5 years, where are we today? It's a service that's used by 203 organizations in 83 countries. In fact, maybe more by now. Those figures are a couple of months old. Over 17,000 registered users. The service we call DMP Online is paid for by research organizations and funding bodies, over 50 of them so far. You can see some of those on the map there. The code DMP roadmap is still open source, and there is a distinction between that free code and the paid for service. And there's evidence that that open source code is used by many. This map, the teal colors there, show the countries in the world that are using that code base to support services of their own. It's still free to use for the researchers, whether or not their organization or funder subscribes. And interestingly, the development and the service team we have behind it now is bigger than it ever was when we had national grant funding. So I think we've successfully managed, I hope, that pivot. But Kevin, you were here to talk about procurement, and you haven't mentioned it so far. So I really think I need to get onto that in the few minutes available to me. I think it's interesting to observe that most of the sales we make don't go through formal procurement processes. And that's at least partly because the price for an individual institution is low enough to escape the requirement for procurement processes to be used. I'm not sure that we designed it that way, but it's a happy accident. And it was one of the things we didn't anticipate. As I said at the outset, we thought we were going to be selling to national bodies. That would have involved procurement processes. And in fact, it's primarily institutions that have subscribed. But we still need, as I said, all that baggage, the contracts, the pricing regimes, the SLAs, the sales, things behind it. But we do have to go through procurement exercises for larger agreements with funders, with national bodies, or with consortia of individual research institutions. We're in the middle of two procurements right now. It's one of the issues with them that you usually have to sign up to all sorts of agreements about confidentiality when we're going through them. I can't tell you who those are with. I hope that we're going to be successful very soon, and I will be able to tell you who we've concluded those agreements with. I think it's worth observing that in contrast to the sort of sales we're making to individual institutions, procurements place really significant time pressures on everybody involved. And I think we really heard that in that first presentation. And unlike the other agreements we have with organizations where we have a standard service model, or a number of standard service models and standard contracts and SLAs that go with that, every procurement is a special case. And you've typically only got a few weeks to respond to something where you've effectively got to design something special for that. That adds significant costs to that initial service provision. And I think it's worth observing larger organizations who do this sort of thing have teams who do nothing else but seek out to and respond to procurements. We don't have that, but luckily, I mean, I say luckily because, you know, it's no joy ever being involved in a procurement process, but we do have experience with responding to procurements in other areas of our work as well, particularly, for instance, in consultancy. So a few of the common pain points I think we perceive as a supplier in this area. Standard procurement procedures often require lots of upfront evidence you may not expect. insurance certificates, certificates that confirm that you've paid your tax or national insurance, all sorts of strange legal documents that you may find it difficult to lay your hands on. In some cases, documents that don't even exist because they exist in the country that's doing the procurement, but there's no parallel in UK law. Once you've gone through these things a few times, you build up a library of these things, it becomes easier to respond.
1 minute reminder.
Sorry?
1 minute to go.
Yep, 1 slide to go. They often use templates that are aimed at a different type of supplier, such as a sole trader or even a type of product, on-site services, and they have lots of questions, therefore, that are relevant to what you're trying to do. The special nature means you've got pricing models that are far from the ones that you developed, and procurement constrains the way you can communicate during the process. And sometimes that works well, but sometimes the communication really isn't effective, and that's another barrier to responding properly. Some of them give you really clear questions to respond to, others, I'm afraid, don't. And without good legal backup, and luckily we have that, you can make really expensive mistakes if you don't understand what you're signing up to. But despite all those, I wouldn't want to end on a negative point. It is a difficulty that we can't promote some of the more esoteric aspects of the service we're selling. You may not be aware that if you're involved in a DMP online user group, you get the chance to participate in axe throwing. You get the chance to partake of our branded cupcakes in the right sort of events. We're often not really able to get across these things in a procurement process, despite the fact that we think it adds to the value. And the other thing I think is worth bearing in mind is, the procurement really is just the beginning of a process like this. And what really matters, I think, is how you can support the customer in the years after that. And setting yourself up to do that right in the procurement, I think, is key. And that's true for both parties in the transaction. And I'm done.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Really interesting. Tamsin, would you be able to go ahead of Rory, just in case Rory hasn't sorted out his technical difficulties?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Give myself.
Or I see Rory's back in, actually, if you want to just check if your audio works. But we've got slides up, actually, it's fine. Let's go ahead.
I don't mind. I'm quite happy to drop out again.
So I think if we go with Tamsin and then
Sounds
Rory
good.
can go fourth. That's great, thank you.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the notes up. Excuse me. Right. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the GIST repositories dynamic purchasing system. But before that, I was just going to quickly tell you who GIST was, but Kevin slightly preempted me. But we're a not-for-profit organisation focused around digital services and solutions. We're a membership organisation, and our members are all the UK public universities and further education colleges, and also the skills.
Something, there is a question in the chat. If you could move your microphone down a little bit.
Okay. If you can't hear me, I've got another headset I can change to, because this can be a bit.
No, that's better now.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. Thank you. So we provide shared infrastructure services such as the Janet network. We negotiate sector-wide deals for IT and publishing, and we also provide our members with advice and guidance. That was meant to be that slide, sorry. So I'm going to talk about dynamic purchasing systems. So what is that? Well, it's a form of a purchasing framework, and in general, frameworks allow procurement from a pre-qualified set of suppliers, and they remove the necessity to undertake some of those costly and time-consuming procurements that Kevin was talking about. The main difference between a dynamic purchasing system and a more standard framework is that the suppliers can join at any time. So this allows suppliers of new innovative products who weren't around at the start of the framework to join. And there's also no limit to the number of suppliers who can join, and there's no need to specify charges for the service up front. This is done on any award on contract. So we've heard about how time-consuming and complex full major procurements can be, and even at lower thresholds, we found that university procurement teams are acquiring some quite complex procedures. This is an OJU, which is a European full procurement system, and you can see it is pretty complex. So some of the reasons why a DPS is a good idea is it's about saving time and money, but it also gives us an opportunity for our members to enforce a minimum set of standards around repositories. So the benefits for suppliers are we have, for buyers are that our suppliers on there are pre-qualified, so they've gone through all the mandatory and discretionary exclusions, finance, insurance, information security, GDPR, but they also have to conform to a minimum set of technical standards around ingest, publishing, discovery, APIs, access, reporting and compliance, and also about how they're going to meet upcoming requirements such as Plan S and other initiatives. So we've set this up to promote standards and interoperability and provide a foundation for open science services. And then buyers can actually specify additional requirements around over and above the ones that we've set as well. And they then run mini competitions. But it's also beneficial for the suppliers. We've just heard about some suppliers really don't have the resources to reply to short timescales in terms of 2-week procurement rounds. They only have to go through pre-qualifying once to get on here, and so they can, and there's no deadline for that, so they can actually do it in their own timescale. And so it's not this matter of only suppliers with big sales teams who can actually get on. And also responding to the mini competitions that a buyer is much less onerous because of that. So how does it work? Well, as a supplier, it's very easy to visit the GIST procurement portal, submit an expression of interest, complete a request to participate form, submit it when you're ready, and there's about a 14-day turnaround. And we haven't actually yet rejected a supplier, so we've had to send some queries back, but all the suppliers who have applied have got on. And then for buyers, you complete our mini competition document, putting your own requirements in, or as long as you provide all the information that's on our document, you can fill out your own. You send that to us, we invite the suppliers, we manage all the clarification questions and responses, and obviously with consultation with the buyer, and we will communicate the outcomes to the suppliers who have tendered, and then after that point, we leave the contracts to be negotiated between the preferred supplier and the buyer. So that's at the point that we step away. So lastly, who can use the service? Well, the buyers are any of our members, and also any of the UK Research Council institutions, so any of those research institutes. But then actually anybody that's joined to the Janet network in the UK, so that includes local authorities and other institutions, whether they'd want a research repository, I'm not sure, but if they did. And also there's a large number of university purchasing consortia, so anybody who's a member of that can use it as well. And in terms of suppliers, well, we currently have 7 suppliers on. We only launched in the spring, just as lockdown and COVID hit, so it's been a strange time. So we're quite pleased. The numbers are still going up, and we're still aware of other suppliers who are in the process of applying. We've got 2 DSpace suppliers, and then also another open source repository from my site's work with Polaris. And then we have some proprietary repositories that I'm sure you're aware of. And then we've also, in the last week or so, the GISC's own research repository has been accepted onto the DPS as well. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I have included a link in my slides to relevant information if anybody's interested in that. That's it.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. And I'm sure there will be some time for questions, and we're going to be using the chat. And also, I'm sure many of these things that you've covered will come up actually in the breakout sessions as well. Thank you very much. So finally, we'll see if we can go back to Rory and Bruce.
Rory, are you speaking? We can't hear you yet. We can see you.
We can see you, but yeah.
Can't hear you. Do you want to maybe try just unplugging the headset? I wonder if it will then convert to like your Mac speakers.
Hi, is that better?
Ah, perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, we hear you.
We can
Oh,
hear
perfect.
you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, sorry about the problems, everyone. Let me share my screen and get started. Can you see my screen?
Not at the moment.
Not yet. Do you have two screens? Maybe it's, well, actually, it's not projecting any screen yet. If you click the share screen, it's like a green button in the bottom of the Zoom.
There's often a short delay even after you do that.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, it's loading just now. Yeah, so it's showing, but not in full presentation mode yet, if you want to flick to that.
Yeah, it's all taking a bit of time, but that should happen momentarily.
That's fine. Excellent. Thanks very much. I'm glad this is working now.
Okay, here we go. Well, thanks for having me. I was really excited when I saw this this workshop. I think this is a workshop which I've been hoping would happen for many years. So this is very exciting, and thanks for having us to speak. I'm going to start and then hand over to Bruce. So what is RSpace? For those who don't know, RSpace is what's called an electronic lab notebook. It's kind of like Google Docs for science, for those of you who don't have any experience with the sector. It's used by people in life sciences to document research and manage data. What's distinctive about RSpace as compared with other offerings of the same kind is that we were research data native. That's the way I think of it. Because this was actually designed in partnership with, in particular, people at the University of Wisconsin under Bruce's direction. And what's interesting is that it was people from the library, from IT, as well as researchers. And that led us to focus on openness and connectivity with infrastructure and other tools so that RSpace can serve as a digital data hub and a conduit to data repositories, furthering FAIR principles. This rather shows you our ecosystem. If you just take for granted that I'm not going to talk about what's inside RSpace today, I'm going to talk about the connectivity, and this comes in nicely with some of the themes yesterday about connection with open infrastructure. So RSpace enables researchers to connect with file sharing tools down on the left. I'm not going to talk about it too much today, but with data from lab instruments, with various tools that researchers use, with data archives, as well as with communication tools like Slack and MS Teams. I'm just going to briefly highlight some of the interesting kind of public infrastructure that we integrate with. Through OwnCloud, we integrate already with SwitchDrive and could easily do the same for SurfDrive, i.e. public file sharing platforms in Switzerland and the Netherlands, respectively. We are also being pressed in particular by universities in Germany to extend that integration with Nextcloud, which, as some of you know, is the open source alternative to OwnCloud. We also have integrations, that's kind of on the infrastructure side. We also integrate with tools that researchers use in research, like open source tools like Protocols.io, as well as things like Office 365. And again, interestingly, we were being pressed by a number of universities in Germany to extend that integration with Collabora Online, which is an open source alternative to Office 365. We also have a very powerful API, which people use to build things on top of RSpace and then integrate themselves with third-party tools. And perhaps most fundamentally, and of interest to this group, Bruce and his colleagues at Wisconsin drummed into us the anti-vendor lock-in mantra. So the fundamental design principle of RSpace is that it's very easy to get data out, so you never have vendor lock-in. On the back of that, we built integrations with, first with DSpace, which was a bit of a false start because it's really for publications, and then with Figshare and Dataverse. So interestingly, we now have 3 organizations that have deployed both Dataverse and RSpace. One is University of Göttingen, one is UIT, the Arctic University of Norway, and the third is Harvard. So we're finding the Dataverse integration in particular very powerful. That's RSpace. What about ResearchSpace? We're a spin-out from the University of Edinburgh, primarily focused on partnering with and selling to universities and research institutes. Our early active engagement with the RDM community, as we have many friends in the RDM community, including those on this call, and that's continued. Our biggest market is Germany, which I would argue is the most, I don't want to be controversial, but I think arguably the most kind of forward-thinking in terms of research data management. We're also active in the US and other European countries, and we have a particular resonance with institutions that are putting together a portfolio of open interoperable tools, as the examples of SwitchDrive, Dataverse, et cetera, I've already mentioned. Our business model is we offer a fully featured free community version for individuals and labs, and we sell to institutions. So we have 3 constituencies. It's extremely difficult because we have to satisfy all of them: researchers who use RSpace, research data managers who deliver RSpace to their researchers, and IT managers who deploy RSpace on behalf of researchers and research data managers. They all have different interests, and sometimes they get along and sometimes they don't. Routes to procurement. Let me, echoing Kevin, belatedly come on to procurement, which is today's topic. So as DMP Online, we engage directly, either kind of bottom up through researchers who then introduce us to research data management, or sometimes through our network where we are reached out to by research data managers. In the US, in large part thanks to Bruce, we're able to interface with CIOs who then kind of in a downward way introduce us to research data service and IT, and then on to researchers. And if this is successful, it usually goes to a pilot and then procurement. The second form of engagement is through an RFI or an RFP, which starts out with filling out the form, which again, Kevin alluded to, usually then a demo. These are all kind of competitive phases, followed by a pilot, and then procurement. So those are our, we follow both paths to procurement. So issues, I'm being very frank here. I think I hope it's useful. Opaque, complex, and slow decision-making. That's on the part of the university. Poor communication internally within the university and also with us. And an expectation of substantial and open-ended upfront investment of time and resource without compensation, which can be frustrating in addition to expensive. And I realize this isn't intentional, but the unintended consequence of this is a huge amount of often of wasted time on the part of ourselves and no doubt others. But I'm actually, those things are there. And, as Kevin said, we just put up with them, that's fine. The 2 structural things I wanted to highlight are first, which I think is important and probably underlooked, but it came up in Laurian's talk yesterday, relating to IT and research data services. So the first is really more of an IT issue. We sometimes spend 6 months to a year while the university hems and haws about whether they want an on-prem or a cloud deployment. And that can be a massive delaying factor in decision-making. But fundamentally what underpins in my view, and I think in Bruce's view and experience, all of the other problems are relatively small and manageable. But the fundamental thing, and this isn't news to anyone, I remember hearing this at a conference in Edinburgh 7 years ago, is the disconnect between research data services and IT. And I think I was asked to highlight one thing among all the things that we think are procurement pain points. This really underlies many of them. So with that, I'm going to put up the final slide. And I should say that I think things are improving, definitely improving, and this conference is an evidence of that. And I hope they will continue to improve. With that, I'm going to put up the last slide and say that it's a pleasure and an honor to introduce Bruce, who for many years was CIO at the University of Wisconsin and had a lot of experience with procurement from the other side, so to speak.
Thanks, Ray. So I want to build a little bit on some of the issues. As the CIO, I was the person who was trying to bring together libraries, IT, and research support leaders, which isn't really ideal. Leadership from the CIO is oftentimes met with some skepticism. The work was slow and challenging, and I frankly, in all honesty, could not gain traction with my counterparts who were leading libraries and the research function at the university. They're really good people, but they had different priorities at the time than what I saw. And so I worked with second and third level leaders and actually built a foundation of trust so that we could move ahead. But I need to tell you that our siloed organizational structure really caused us to have some challenges. So I'd like to highlight something that I've become aware of through the work with Research Space, and that is at the University of Bonn, they have made an effort to address this with the creation of a service center that has participation of all the key stakeholders. And while they would be the very first to say and would expect me to say that they're in no position at this moment to say whether or not this experiment is successful or not, because it's so early, it was just highly encouraging to me to see that they have a place where everyone can get together. Budgetary issues become easier. I can't tell you the amount of time that we spent at the University of Wisconsin talking about, well, who is going to pay for this? Who's responsible? Whose budget does it come out of? And that really becomes a barrier, as and would have been easier had we come up with a joint kind of proposal that came out that would bring everything together. So I think we should watch this experiment at Bonn very carefully. And there are some at other universities as well, because I think a changed university structure can actually help participate. I can tell all of you, and especially those of you who have served research for such a long time, that I see my job as serving research and serving the research community, but that is not always the legacy, and it's not always the experience that people have had where their IT leaders listen to the academic mission and the needs of the academic mission. So we should watch this carefully. My view is procurement becomes more effective, easier, less painful for the both for the universities and for the private sector's companies when we have a structure that allows us to take a unified approach. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you so much, Rory, Bruce. Really, really interesting. And certainly this idea of a service centre, I think that's something that we shall be watching very closely. Thank you. So what we're going to do now is take a 5-minute comfort break. People have been posting their questions in the chat. Thank you very much for that. There has been some responses there, but please do reach out to all our presenters outside of the chat as well. If you want any further clarification or a conversation, around their very interesting presentations, and I thank you all. Thank you very much for the presentation. So we shall now take a 5-minute comfort break.